Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Money and Stuff. I'm your host, Sam Rodriguez, certified financial planner. With me, as always, Conor Shepard. Man, I never know what to say. We really got to get that intro together. Something that says something for us.
I think like if nothing else, we could just do a small hey, I'm your host, Sam Rodriguez. With me as always is Conor Shepard. Thanks again for tuning in to Money and Stuff. We got a good subject for you today. Let's talk.
Why don't you give me that advice before, man? Let's just tell everybody what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're talking about 5 confusing things that people find confusing about retirement.
That's right. 5 things that we know people find confusing when trying to something with their retirement.
Yeah.
All right. We'll have a good headline by the time we put this out.
Yeah. The episode's title will be better.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just gonna say what the 5 questions are, and then we'll just go from there, right? So number 1, people are trying to figure out, what are my expenses going to be in retirement? Number 2 is, how much should I save? Number 3 is, what should I be investing in? 4 is, when should I actually retire? And then 5 is, how do I create an income when I actually am retired? So let's tackle number 1, how to know what my expenses are. This is probably, out of these 5, the easiest one to answer.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of advisors will have you look at your bank statements, your credit card statements, whatever it is, and go through and categorize every one of your expenses to figure out, where are you spending your money? Which, I'm not saying that that's a fruitless exercise, but for a lot of people, that exercise can seem so daunting that you just don't ever do it for a number of reasons. It's going to be time consuming. And most people don't like looking at their budget because it's painful to see that you're probably spending more money than you should. And even if you're not, it's a little bit being scared that you're going to find something out, right? It's kind of like going to the doctor.
Exactly.
Right? What if I find out something's really wrong? Yeah, maybe you should find that out. So anyway, rather than going through that, if you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. It'll serve you well. But rather than going through all of your expenses, one of the easiest things you can do is start with whatever your take-home pay is right now, right? Not your actual pay, but your take-home pay, because that's the money you're actually living on. So you start with your take-home pay. And then the other thing to look at now is you want to break your expenses into 3 separate categories. You want to break your expenses into what are like your necessary or your needs, right? Food, shelter, those types of things. Like, you're always going to have to eat. You're always going to have to pay your utility bills. You figure out all of those things that you have to pay for no matter what. And then you decide, okay, what are my wants? What are the things that I spend money on that I don't necessarily have to spend money on? Right? Because that tells you where your wiggle room is if you needed to cut any expense. And then the third thing to look at is your debt, right? And the reason you want to look at your debt is because your debt expenses, hopefully, are not going to be there the entire time you're retired. Mm-hmm. And if planned right, you will be debt-free by the time you are in retirement. You would be surprised how little you can get by on in retirement if you get rid of your debt. If you go into retirement without a mortgage, without a car payment, without credit card, if you go into retirement without those debts, those are huge expenses for most people, especially a mortgage. So if you can knock those out, right, then you can look at what those other things are, and you'd probably have a lot more room for your wants. But you want to categorize them into those three areas: your needs or necessities, your wants, and your debts. And then you can look at it and say, okay, what of this is going to go away when I actually retire? Right.
Yeah.
So you'd be surprised how much you spend if you're going to the office every day, right? Tolls, gas, wear and tear on your car, clothes for work, buying lunch every day, those types of things. You can go in and you can say, this much of the gas I spend is because of this. These clothes that I have to buy are because of this. These lunches that I buy every day are because of this.
Yeah.
So you can look at it that way without necessarily having to go into detail to figure out, okay, this is what I need to live and enjoy my time in retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Never mind. I lost it.
All right, man. Go ahead and ask it, and then we'll decide if we're going to put it in.
No, I genuinely totally lost
have nothing.
it. I had it, and it's gone.
So let's just move on to number 2 then.
Yep.
So number 2 is, how much should I save? Um, man, what do you think the answer to that is?
Man, it depends, right?
That's right. That's right. If you've listened to us for any period of time at all, you know a lot of answers come down to it depends, right? So,
We'll just leave it at
how
that
much?
and move on to number three. No.
Let's move on to number three. Guess what the answer is there? It depends. Number four, it depends. Number five, it depends. Thanks for listening. Yeah. So, how much to save? I mean, largely depends on that number you figured out of what your expenses are going to be.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing you have to do to figure out how much you should save is figure out how much those expenses are going to be, however many years away from your retirement you are now.
Mm.
So, let's say you take inflation and just say inflation is going to be 3% on average from here until retirement. You have to go in and do the calculation to say, how much does that mean that I'm going to need?
Yeah.
Right. And I will tell you, I was doing some calculations in preparing for this. And depending on your age, that number can be extremely disheartening.
Yeah.
Right. Because the amount of money you need, depending on the age, right? So if you're 25, your income's going to at least triple just based on inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Not assuming that you're going to get raises or jobs or increased pay. Just because of inflation, what you're spending right now is going to at least triple. If you are 40, you can still expect it to double by the time you're 65.
Mm-hmm.
So what you've got to do is, again, figure out what your expenses are, figure out what that income is going to be in the future based on inflation. And then you got to do a calculation of how much does that mean you need to save? Because, now that you know how much you're going to be spending in retirement, then you have to do a calculation of how much do I need to have saved as a lump sum?
In order to
in
be
order
able
to
to
know
afford
what
that.
you need to save now. And this is where having an advisor really comes in. An advisor walks you through all of this and does these calculations for you. If your advisor isn't doing that for you, if your advisor is just investing your money, I've always thought it was weird to that advisors will just manage people's money without knowing what people actually needed.
Yeah.
How do you decide? Because how do you decide how to invest their money if you don't know that how you're investing money is actually going to get them to retirement? And one of the things as advisors that your advisor should be doing is helping you to determine how much you should be saving on a month-to-month basis in order to reach your retirement goal. Right. So it's difficult. I'm sorry, I can't say, save 5% or save 10% or save 15% of your income. It just depends on your situation. I can tell you this, as far as saving goes, if you have a 401k through your job and they offer a match, then you absolutely should do that first because it's free money that they're going to give you. I know there's people out there right now. I see these ads saying, 401ks are bad. That's ridiculous. I don't know of another investment vehicle that as soon as you put the money in, it doubles because your employer matches it. Mm-hmm. Right. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic way to build wealth because of the match, if nothing else.
Yeah.
The match that match will mean more than saving in taxes or even what you invest in because it's free money. So no matter how much you're saving, take advantage of the match in your 401k. Let's move to number 3. What should I actually be investing in? Man, it depends. So number 1 is I'm going to say something that I think a lot of people don't think about, but you've got to think about taxes, right? And don't just automatically go for what's going to be tax-free in retirement. What you want to do is you want to create tax diversification. Yeah. We did an episode several months ago about tax diversification. Go back and listen to why it's important. But you want tax diversification so that way you can control your taxes or have more control of your taxes in retirement. You want some money that's going to be fully taxable, like your 401k. You want some money where you're going to be taxed on your gains, and then some money that will be tax-free. And what that'll allow you to do when you're actually in retirement is to create a strategy to keep yourself in a low tax bracket. So, and for a lot of people, that could mean a tax-free tax bracket, but it gives you the choice to adapt and move with changing tax laws.
Yeah. Having that maneuverability, I think, is as important as knowing how much or knowing what to invest in, like having the ability to make those adjustments and keep yourself
Yeah,
below that threshold.
putting yourself in that position of choice, like having
Exactly.
the ability to change and move as necessary.
100%.
So in terms of specific investments, if you're not quite sure what to do, especially if you're not in the 401k or something like that, when you start looking at the investment world, you realize that there are like thousands of options,
It's the
right?
Wild West.
Tons of things you can do. I can tell you that you do not have to get fancy. Yeah, if nothing else, choose an S&P 500 fund and just keep putting money into it. Though I will tell you, the older you get, the more risky that gets. So I would also tell you to seek the advice of a financial advisor that should tell you what you should be investing in. The other thing too is that there's options out there. There are mutual funds and ETFs out there that actually create a diversified portfolio for you that is conservative, moderate, or aggressive. You get to choose. What are you? And those funds and ETFs are managed. Tell you a little secret, managed very much the same way, if not the exact same way, as what most advisors are charging you for to manage.
Yeah.
Right. That's why, what we do, it kind of blows our mind a little bit that, people are paying for that style of management. I know that we think it's important that you get something beyond that you get better management than that, because you really can get that style of management for free, which is your, diversified buy and hold.
Yeah.
You can get that so inexpensively now without having an advisor. So the other thing I think where a advisor really comes into play is helping you determine what your parameters are. So one of the first things we do with clients when they're determining what their investment style should be is we figure out their boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Most people start with your risk tolerance and, how aggressive or conservative are you? That is absolutely the wrong way to start. And I'm going to tell you why. Your risk tolerance doesn't tell you what you actually need to get to your goal. So what you've got to do is a calculation that tells you where should I be, right? So what you need to determine are two things. Number one is the low end. What's the least amount of money you can make and still hit your goal? That tells you how conservative you can get, because the more conservative you are, the less you can expect to make over time. The second parameter is how much money can you lose and still hit your goal.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you how aggressive you can get, because yes, being more aggressive over time, it's possible you can make more money, but you could also lose a lot more. So once you know how much you could lose and you have your aggressive parameter, and you know how much you have to make, so you have your conservative parameter, then you can see if your risk tolerance is between those two goalposts. As long as your risk tolerance is between those two goalposts, yes, your risk tolerance is very relevant. But you have to know these two parameters before you decide how you want to invest your money. Number 4, when should I retire? And whenever you want, I guess.
When it's all lined up.
Yeah, when all of these things are lined up. Yes, ideally, yes, you have a plan that says if you're doing X, Y, and Z and you're invested this way, here's when you can retire.
Yeah.
Right. But I know a lot of people focus on the number. How much do I need to retire? What is the amount I need to retire? And that, going by a specific number is very, very deceiving. It's just kind of a wrong way to do it, because that number depends on when you retire. So that can be the number if you retire at 65. But if you say, man, I hit that number at 60, well, that's not your number at 60, because we got to add 5 more years of you living on this money.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going for a specific number, you're probably going about it the wrong way. Your age has to factor into that, or your age of retirement has to factor into that. So when you should retire, I would say,
like if you could give like a broad, like as general a recommendation on when you retire, like is it when you've accumulated enough savings, retirement funds that will allow you to live on that amount of money? Like, is there, do you think there's a general way of it?
I mean, that's it. I would say if you're close to retirement, you're probably wanting to have somewhere between 12 to 16, 17% of your expenses invested. But even that's a tough number to give you, because Social Security factors into that. If you've got Social Security, you may not need as much. If you've got a pension, you may not need as much. If your debts are paid, you may not need as much. So it's hard to say, right? But I'd say for most people, I'd say somewhere between 12 to 16, 17%. To be safe, you could say 20 times. I said 12 to 16, 17%. What I meant to say is times, 12 to 16, 17 times. Sort of the industry standard is to say 20 times. I will tell you in my calculations, for a lot of people, that's probably overkill. But and that's a hard number to achieve, right? If you started saving late in life, that can feel extremely overwhelming and maybe even impossible. And you don't want an impossible goal, because an impossible goal you might never try to achieve.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to do two things at one time: to figure out how to bring your expenses down while you're bringing your savings up. And hopefully, if you're bringing your expenses down, that extra money that you have is going into savings. So it'll automatically do that.
Mm-hmm.
But from a retirement standpoint, I'll tell you, it also depends on what your idea of retirement is. More and more people that we talk to, they're actually in a job that's very fulfilling to them.
Yeah.
Right. And what they would be doing if they retired is not as fun or fulfilling to them as what they're doing for work. They find purpose in work.
Yeah.
So I would say, really, what you want to think about is this what I want to continue doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't dislike your job, then what are you retiring to? Like, what are you going to be doing? And I'll tell you, it's very dangerous to retire if you're going to be bored.
Yeah.
If you're going to be bored, there are all sorts of ways that you can ruin your retirement.
Yeah.
So not only do you have to be monetarily ready, you need to be psychologically and emotionally ready. You need to know how you're going to spend your time, where you're going to find fulfillment, who you're going to spend time with, what you're going to do to stay connected. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't realize is once you leave work, you're out of sight, out of mind to your work friends. All right. Maybe for a little while they invite you to things, but how many things at work where they decide to go out and do something are spur of the moment, and they're just talking to the people immediately around them. So you've got to find a different social circle. So you really, I will say, there's a lot more emotional and psychological preparation that needs to happen before you feel ready for retirement. The monetary piece, I mean, talk with an advisor, and an advisor can tell you, hey, here's when you're going to be okay to retire. I would say don't plan on being one of those people who's going to work forever, because most people who think that they're going to work beyond 65 don't get to, for a lot of different reasons: their own health, family members' health, their industry changes. You're at the top of the pay scale, and if there's cuts, guess who's going to get cut, right? So I would try to be prepared for retirement, I'd say by 62 to 65.
Yeah.
The last thing is how to create income. Talk to an advisor. It can be simple. It can be complicated. I know a lot of people like to go into annuities because they give guaranteed income. I'm going to tell you the big danger with an annuity, or anything that gives you guaranteed income: inflation is going to catch up with you.
Yep.
So let's say that you get an annuity that's going to pay you $5,000 or $6,000 a month. That's fantastic now for you if that covers what you need. But what about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Yeah.
Right. If you're retiring in your 60s, with modern medicine, you're probably going to live into your 90s. And I know people say, well, average life expectancy is like mid 70s. What you have to realize about average life expectancy is that also takes into account people who died as infants, people who died when they were teenagers, people who died when they were in their 20s. When you hit 60, your chances of living into your late 80s gets really, really high. Right. And if you're married, the chances of one of you living into your 90s is like 50%.
Wow.
So you've really got to be prepared for like a 30-year retirement, right? So that money needs to last. And if you think that the money that an annuity, or even if you go into some fixed product that you say, man, this thing pays me 5% right now, and that 5% I can live on. Okay, great. What if it's not 5% next year?
Yeah.
What about in 10 years? That 5% isn't going to be enough, because everything that you're spending money on right now is going to cost more. And that's the real danger to your retirement. It's not the market, right? Because the market goes up and down. If you have a good strategy, you can work your way through that. The biggest danger to your retirement is the fact that everything you spend money on today is going to cost more in the future. And you have to have a strategy to prepare yourself for that. So what does that mean? How do you create income? I know the whole team doesn't agree with what we should call this, but I call it the FBS strategy, the field barn silo strategy.
Nice.
Because I grew up when I was a teenager, I worked on a ranch, right? And in this ranch, there was a field, there was a barn, there was a silo. And in the silo was protected grain, cattle feed, whatever that's made out of, right? We knew we could go to it. The barn held all the hay that if we didn't have enough cattle feed, the hay was protected in the barn. And then we had to replace the hay. So we had a field where we grew grass. And I think of your investments in the same way. You know, the what you need now compared to what you need 5 years from now, compared to what you need 10 years from now, that money needs to be invested differently, right? So in your silo is, what is my guaranteed income? Social Security, pension, anything like that. Then you figure out what that gap is. What is the gap between what my expenses are and what that guaranteed income is? So whatever that number, that dollar amount is in the barn, what you want is about 5 years worth of that gap. And why do you want that in the barn, and what's in the barn? So the barn is safer investments, things that we're not worried about the huge ups and downs of the market. So why do we want 5 years? Because the field is what we invest for growth. The field is what's going to help you combat inflation. The field is where we're going to continue to grow to make sure that you don't run out of money. But the crops don't always come in. There are bad years in the market. And the worst thing you can do is, if your money is down 10, 15, 20%, is pull your money from there.
Yeah.
Because as a percentage, you're having to pull a lot more out. So that's why you want what's in the barn, because that money stayed steady. And 5 years will allow enough time for the markets to come back, for your investments to come back in value, right? And you can refill the barn. But that way you can always have money growing for you to help you combat inflation without worrying about the fact that you're pulling money from there. Don't worry about the money that's going up and down, because we're pulling money from a safe place when things aren't going well. If you do that, you can always create income. You'll always be able to create income as long as you're not outspending what you've saved.
Yeah.
That's it. All your questions answered. And these are tough, right? These are difficult.
Well,
articles.
They're difficult, and it's easy to understand why these would be questions that people would stress so much about, and it also kind of makes sense why they would be confused, because they sound several of them sound like they could be just a direct answer, right? How much? When should I retire? What should I invest in? It's like, hey, most things I can go A to B. Here's the answer. Yeah. But yeah,
and that's sense. What most of us want. Most of us want an easy answer, right? Most of us want, hey, it should be the solution to this is this.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how, man, unfortunately in this industry, that's how a lot of products get sold to people. Yeah. Is here's the solution. You want to do this? Here's this product. And that drives me crazy, because that advisor, right, is selling the same product to everybody. Somehow it fits everybody's situation. And nothing is like that. Everybody needs to go through the process of figuring out what all of these 5 things are for them specifically. And if you do it that way, you'll find that the answers to these questions are slightly different for everybody, sometimes dramatically different. And I know everybody wants the quick fix, easy solution, rule of thumb. And there are some rules of thumb out there, but they're not necessarily right for everybody. If you want to be sure, you need to have a plan. You need to have something that works through all of these questions that says, this is exactly what you should be doing. And I'll tell you another thing. Think about what your life was like 5 years ago. How different is your life today? Not just expense-wise, but how different is your life today than it was 5 years ago? What things do you do differently today? What different hobbies do you have? What different spending habits do you have? Your life is always going to change. So doing this, even after you figure this out, you're going to have to do it again and again and again and again, because it's not always going to be true to your situation anymore.
Yeah.
The amount of money you spend today, not just because of inflation, but because your life is going to change. It's probably going to be different 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What you have the ability to invest in is going to be different. Right? With technology, not only are all the things, the devices we use changing, financial instruments are changing as well. So there's other opportunities that come up that you can have.
Yeah.
Right? There may be changes to Social Security. There could be changes to tax law. There could be changes to a lot of things.
Yeah, there's so many unknowns that no financial advisor can account for.
Right.
Right.
Right. And that's why I dislike when people say tax law can change, so let's get you in a tax-free retirement. It's like, well, what if tax law doesn't change? And then you've made people pay all of these taxes today, and it actually hurt them for their future. Tax law will change probably, but that doesn't mean that it's going to change in the way that you have to have everything tax-free.
Yeah.
So create tax diversification so that way you can adapt and change, right? All of these things need to be adaptable. So that's one of the other reasons why sometimes I get frustrated with annuities, is because they're so rigid, right? And, you know, there's new ones that have come out that are not as rigid, but it's still an annuity.
Yeah.
It's still going to be one of the most rigid things you can purchase. And I'll tell you, I'm not against annuities. I mean, but you're basically purchasing insurance. But when you purchase insurance, you're definitely giving something up.
Yeah.
Right. And so you got to think about what you're giving up, and flexibility is a huge piece of that. I think that's good, man. Right. Covered them enough. Did I miss anything? You think there's anything we should have, any thoughts you have, or anything we should have covered?
No, I think that was awesome. You know, like I said, I think it definitely makes sense to me why these would be such common questions and why people could get confused on it, like I said. So I think we did a good job of addressing it. I think more than anything, you know, it really just reinforces the importance of, or rather, it reinforces the value in dealing with some short-term discomfort, taking the time to look at your expenses, look at your income, running these numbers, or sitting down with a planner who can help you figure that out. Dealing with that short-term discomfort will ultimately lead to a prosperous long-term future. So
sometimes as advisors, the role we play is like a sounding board, right? Giving you all of the different options. And I'll tell you, there's always going to be the most effective and efficient way to get there, but that doesn't mean it's the best way for you. You know, I'll tell you, I made that mistake early on in my career, is I would create these financial plans and present them to people. And if it wasn't quite at the level of comfortability where someone felt good moving forward, I was very rigid in telling people, like, look, this is the absolute best thing you can do. You need to do this. This is how we're going to get from A to B. And I had to figure out that everybody was going to be different. People's emotional, psychological states were going to be different. And sometimes what I needed to do is go with a plan that was still going to get them there, maybe not as efficiently, but less efficient, and something they could emotionally and psychologically stick with was better than an efficient plan that they gave up.
Yes. Well said.
Right. Let's end on that. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Again, if you have any questions, as always, Connor, can you put your email in the comments so that way if people have questions, they can shoot you over a question?
It'll be in the description, and it'll also be in a comment. I'll leave it twice.
Awesome. All right. Send them whatever you want.
Yeah.
Personal questions, whatever.
Within reason, you know, keep the images to a bare minimum, but send
right,
whatever
man.
you want.
All right. You could have said, don't send any images. Well, you leave it open when you say to a bare minimum.
Well, I don't know. If a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader suddenly listened to a financial info podcast, I would
just don't send pictures, people. Don't send pictures. Please don't send pictures. Financial questions only, please. All right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time, guys.